We welcome Mike Alexander to the show. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
I'm glad to be here.
I've been looking forward to this show for a while, ever since you led my Peer 180 review for Tonwin and I.
17 years ago.
Yeah, approximately 17. Well, it was 2017. So let's jump right in with our icebreaker question. What is your favorite superpower?
So I have two, because one is common, flying. Yes. I have had a dream since I was 13 years old. I remember the first time I had the dream. I remember where the dream was set. It was set in reality in my parents' backyard, the house I grew up in.
Right.
And I was flying. And I still have this flying dream, but it's not like zooming around flying. It's more of a floating. So bouncing up off the ground and floating, and then those floats turn into long-term floats above things. So I still love that. So that's if I could have one, that would be it. But that one's so simple that my other one is probably something John Krychek would call presence, but it's a nostalgic view of presence. I wish I had the ability throughout my lifetime, and I wish others did too, to recognize those important moments in their life while the moment is happening. Yeah. So if I could have recognized that moment so that today my memory of that moment would be better. So I don't want to go back in time. I don't want to go back and revisit the moment. I want to have better memory of some of those key moments in my life. This is probably nostalgic. I lost my dad about a year and a half ago. My father-in-law passed away just a few weeks ago. So that's probably some nostalgia around wanting to remember some time with him better. So, and I don't know what to call that other than some nostalgic view of presence in the moment for better memory. That's the superpower I'd really like to have.
Are all of these moments, is it clear immediately afterwards, or do some of the moments not become clear? Like you mentioned losing.
Yeah, so I was,
to you.
We were talking about this last week, and the moment that sticks out that I wish I had a better memory of was I was 13, 14, 15 years old and walking in the woods with my dad.
Yeah.
And that's all sort of cobbled together now as a general memory, but I'm sure there were very specific moments about that I would like to be able to remember today. And then to answer your question, I'm sure there are some of those moments in my lifetime that I don't to this day know the value of them. So to have some inventory
later.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think we get better at that as we get older. Becoming a recently becoming a grandparent has probably changed some of the ability to slow down and see those moments. But from my earlier days, especially with generations who have gone, to be able to hold on to those memories would be a really cool thing to have and a thing to be able to gift others.
Right. By the way, I told my brother, David Wiggins, friend of the show, and our mutual friend, Justin Kling, that you were guesting today. And since iPhones are now too smart for anyone's good, it linked them both to Mike Alexander, the bassist for the British band Evil, who is unfortunately no longer with us. I assured David that you are not a recently deceased thrash metal bassist. So I'd like to pat myself on the back for that.
But if I were recently deceased, if someone used the phrase thrash metal bassist in referring to me, that'd be pretty cool.
It would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't play bass. No.
You had the long hair though.
I had the hair. That was about it. That's all I had.
I want to know about this. When did you have the hair?
Oh, gee. All through undergraduate and for several years after. It was some act of youthful rebellion, going to a very small private liberal arts school and having hair and earrings.
Okay.
Yeah. And plus, worked in theater and radio, and it was somewhat required, at least in my head.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to steal something from you for our next set of questions. So you're just to talk briefly about what you do. So you've brought quite a few tools to Maze as the leader of the professional MBA program. And I want to start with a tool you use to help members of a team get to know each other, the personal histories exercise. These are similar to our rapid fire questions at the end of the episode in that you answer them fairly briefly and they pack a punch. So let's start with the first one. Where'd you grow up?
Just outside Longview, Texas, small town in East Texas.
How many kids were in your family?
There were and still are two of us, me and a little sister.
Okay. What was your first job?
My first job was working for Uncle James. I was probably 11, 12 years old. He owned some apartments in town, and I helped him mow and flip apartments and paint and do that sort of stuff in the summer. Probably, 11, 12 years old. I was Uncle James' helper.
Okay. What was your greatest challenge as a child?
So when I was third, fourth grade, I had a pretty bad stutter. Oh. And that, at that time in our educational system, that led to some branding. I was earmarked. I was put over there. And I had a mother and a fourth grade teacher who vehemently disagreed with that. And so through a process of, a year and a half, I was removed from that brand. So basically, I was considered challenged in some way because I had a stutter. And so I had to overcome that. So that was the greatest challenge, was basically being stuck in a bucket of folks that either I didn't fit with, or that we disagreed with, or that didn't fit me because of some externality.
I'm glad that worked out, because shooting straight, you're one of the smartest guys I know, one of the smartest people I know. I wonder how many people, maybe people from lower income families, like end up in that bucket long term. I don't know. Maybe this conjecture is a dead end, but it's unfortunate that sort of thing has to happen. Yeah,
it's hard to know, and it gives you some perspective. I thank you. I don't think I'm all that smart. I think I just work hard, and I think it goes back to that. As I literally had to go to speech therapy to overcome that, which then is sort of a beautiful irony that then for a part of my life, I actually used my voice and my speech to make a living. So I don't know how that has probably affected a lot of other folks, but it does give you a window into that possibility of those negative outcomes. Okay, so when we do these personal history exercises, we're often doing them for team building. And just for our little team of two, as we work on this recording together,
let's team build.
I'm going to ask you the same questions. Where'd you grow up?
For it.
Where'd you grow up?
Here, College Station.
Okay, College Station, Texas. Where'd you go to high school?
Consolidated.
How many kids in your family?
There were 3. There are now 5. We blended.
And in the 5, where are you?
Oldest.
Oh.
Barely. Barely, by 3 months. Haha, Amanda.
Okay, that probably says a lot. Figure that out later. First job.
I worked for ag engineering out in the sorghum fields, and that was brief. And then I worked at Cinemark Theaters, where I saw Endgame on Saturday.
Ooh, I worked at a movie theater when I was 17, 18.
Nice.
We have that. So that's that's the purpose of this, is we find these things that are common. We see people as human, as members of families, as having weird first jobs. Challenge as a child. What was your challenge as a child?
The collapse of my parents' marriage. Not just the divorce. The divorce was tough, but through the 90s, my parents' marriage fell apart and ended in divorce. And that whole evolution for several years was terribly difficult.
So for people that you work with, people that are around you a lot, that may manifest in certain behaviors.
Well, I'm sure it does.
And them understanding where those behaviors come from may help them value those behaviors more. It may help them be less annoyed at behaviors they don't value.
Right.
So again, part of the purpose of this is right out of 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick Lencioni, personal histories exercise. That's the point. Just get to know each other. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Yeah, it's one of the books I just love and use a lot.
There were 2 really good things that came out of the end of my parents' marriage. The first one was they're both happily remarried now. And as much as I appreciate the fact that they got together in the first place, for obvious reasons, I do think that they're both in better matches now. I really appreciate both of my step parents. Shouts to Veronica Wiggins and Mark Painter. I appreciate you both. Love you both. And I just think the families, I think the families make more sense now. And I really appreciate my step siblings. And it's just, I get 2 families now. It wasn't great at the time, but now it's really turned into a blessing. The other thing that's come out of it is I have a really, because all of the family went through extensive therapy as a result of this. And so I have a really for a layperson, I have a pretty good understanding of the therapeutic process, and from a couple of different perspectives, because my dad, as he will tell you, if you ask, and sometimes unprompted, is a recovering alcoholic, has been sober for 26 years now, I believe. And so his enactment of the 12 steps has really helped me in learning how to deal with emotionally difficult things.
So that explanation that you just gave, being willing to do that, imagine that around a newly forming team, 5, 6, 7 people trying to lead some unit or some organization, and they have those kinds of conversations. That's the value of things like that simple little tool, personal histories exercise. Get to know each other as humans, to be more forgiving of people based on their past, just to have a greater understanding of those people that you spend 8 or 9 hours a day with, that we often really let under our skin for silly reasons.
Right.
And hearing that explanation, and then you hearing those kinds of things from me, and we've done this here. We've done this several times here in the MBA programs, to get to know each other, to be better, to be more effective, to be better team members, to create a better product, to beat the competition, to create more value in the market, just by getting to know this about your family.
I want to tie that back to how you and I first met, which was during my Peer 180 review after the first semester of the full-time MBA program. You and I and Tan Nguyen, shouts to Tan, great guy, we sat in a room and talked about what our MBA teams had said about us. And the biggest takeaway that you gave me as a person and as a leader in the MBA program was, be careful about individualizing too soon. Because one of the things that I have come out of my childhood into adulthood with is I tend to tailor my approach to team building to the person, but to some people that feels like I'm not treating others equally. And you said, beware of that. And so I wonder if the effect of doing something like this, I don't know, finding common ground to me is always valuable. I don't know quite how I'm trying to tie all this together.
Well, there's value in finding common ground, and then there's certainly value in understanding uncommon ground. So understanding where people come from. You know, the classic example in Patrick Lencioni's book, 5 Dysfunctions. So it's a fable. It's a fable, so it's just written as a story. But there is a character in the book who is the CFO of an organization, and she is so cost conscious, nearly a penny pincher, that she's in a startup that she's annoying the people around her. But then when people understand that she grew up with in a family that was poor, dad had a hard time holding down a job, just never had a lot of money, and that makes her worry about money. When the rest of the team understood that, then they could appreciate why she is, how her outlook manifests. And then they could actually sort of do some forgiving and appreciate it. You know, if we're going to have a conservative member of the team, we'd rather it be you, the CFO. So good. And is it okay if sometimes we tell you to park that? And of course, in the book, she says, yeah, you can tell me when to park it, but you need to know where it's coming from for me.
Right.
So that's part of the value, is finding the uncommon ground and learning how to find some value in it, something that you appreciate that then can turn into some bit of operation. So you're going to do something different than I'm going to do. You're going to bring a different view, or you're going to have an ability or a viewpoint different than me. And appreciating that for the output, for the purpose, for the product or the service that you're building, to put the best of us together for the customer or whoever we're building it for. That's why you do it. And sometimes those things can show up in simple little questions like, well, what was your first job? And you never know where those are going to go. And, you know, you can add to this whole process. You can add things like Myers-Briggs or the Berkman or Strength, so you can get into personality profiling. And that can certainly add depth to our knowledge of each other, and to starting the process of building trust on a team. But if you want to start simple, where'd you grow up?
I feel like I'd like to ask these questions of Thanos, the Mad Titan. Where'd you grow up? What was your first job? How many kids were in your family? If only so, I could hear him talk in the Thanos voice. I enjoy the Thanos voice a lot.
Well, to that point, so I'm, and maybe we'll get to this, but I'm actually relatively introverted, and so put me in a social situation, put me at a party where I feel some need to network or to talk to people. Same dadgum questions. Hey, where'd you grow up? Tell me about your childhood. I mean, just typically great conversations that typically will get a little deeper than the surface of what do you do for a living and what brought you here today. And not everybody always responds perfectly, but I find them to be perfectly easy, sometimes very beneficial questions to ask just to get to know people.
Now we want to know some more details about your professional life. You were somehow both a valedictorian and a salutatorian in your undergraduate work. Then fresh out of college, you became a radio personality?
Yeah, I actually did. I was a DJ for about 3 years. If I remember correctly, it was probably my last year or two of undergrad and then a year or two after. So like weekend fill-in DJ in addition to my day job. So yes, I was a DJ.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you about the valedictorian salutatorian thing.
Why not?
Oh, no. I had enough hours to graduate and to get 2 degrees, and I didn't know it.
Oh.
So I earned a degree and then found out that I actually had enough hours to get a second degree. All I had to do was apply.
Okay.
And so I graduated again 3 months later.
Yeah.
And somebody had a better GPA than me that time.
Oh.
That's all. Yeah.
What do you think would surprise people the most about the way radio worked in the early 90s?
I don't know if it would be a surprise, but the biggest surprise to me was how dreadfully boring it was.
Oh.
And so literally picture doing this with no one sitting in the other chair. That's what it was. And it was the great value to that was I literally thought that's what I wanted to do for a living. I changed my major so that I could become a radio personality. That's what I wanted to do. And best case, it, helped me make the rent. It was really best case. It was just so tedious and boring. And yeah, so I either need to be around people or I need to be by myself. And that was like a straddling position where I was by myself and very strangely around thousands of people that I never could see. And I didn't like it at all. So boring. Yeah, it was this with no one on the other side of the table.
Right. It's all you're sort of pontificating by default all the time.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the difference would be because I was a fill-in, a weekend guy. There was no co-host. There was no show. So I think the difference would be when I listen to, especially morning talk radio, where there's 2 or 3 personalities working together, have a shared history. That would probably be a lot more fun. At the same time I was a DJ, I was also directing morning television news. Now that was anything but boring. That was a complete mess every day. So you never knew what you were walking into. The news always changed. I was in charge of the production. So I was making sure that the product we put on the air was what the guy that wrote the news and the people who performed the news, making sure it was what they intended. And it was something different every day. It moved at a pace that I could barely keep up with, which was what made me not all that great at it, is it moved at a tremendous pace and was exhaustingly exciting at 4:30 in the morning.
So exhaustingly exciting in a good way. Did you love the work? Did you love the work or did you not?
Loved making television. And that could be done not live,
right,
or live. So I loved making television back then. Making it live at that time in my career was really hard for me. So that was the exhaustingly exciting part.
Right.
Yeah, because it was actually probably a step above my skill level what I was doing, directing morning news, being in charge of that function, that operation, and essentially for 30 minutes.
Right.
Performing for 30 minutes. And that's all the behind the scenes stuff that you don't see. Like when you watch the local news and you see those 3 or 4 people up there, there's an army behind them and someone is directing that army that's behind them. And it is typically extremely fast-thinking people.
Of course.
And I am not extremely fast-thinking.
See, that,
so that's what was struggle to me.
It surprises me to hear you say that, because if you were to ask me, so I mentioned earlier that you're one of the smarter people that I've met, and if you were to say, what is most striking about Mike Alexander's intelligence, and I'm not saying this to inflate your ego, it's just an observation, is how fast you seem to process things. Ooh. So explain this to me.
Yeah, I think I work around a lot of people, including that one sitting right over there, Dr. Shannon Deere, who process.
Shouts to Shannon.
Just Dr. Mahajan, Mark Antonio. Mm-hmm. These folks all process so much faster than I do. Mm-hmm. I think what I have that maybe represents as processing is I will collect a lot of ideas and thoughts in the background. And so then I'm able to apply them relatively quickly, but they're not unique new thought. It maybe is, I've got a standard set of ingredients and I'll just apply them to you. So they're relatively limited. So I got a pretty small drawer of stuff I'm pulling from.
Right.
And so maybe it represents as quick. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's because I've had to collect for a number of years.
You talked earlier about how radio in the 90s was striking because of how boring it was.
For me. Right. Yeah, for me, it was boring for me. Yeah.
To do that particular job.
Yeah.
I think anybody would think that's a fair statement. So now, are DJs, such as they are they playing on their phones while songs play? Like, I think how we deal with boredom and the fact that we don't have to deal nearly so much with boredom anymore, because we have this thing in our pocket that can alleviate boredom pretty much any time you have to sit around and wait for something. The only time you can't use it is if you're sitting in an MBA class, because then the program director will will get mad at you. The big question here is the fact that we don't have to deal with boredom really nearly so much anymore. It still happens here and there, but is that a blessing or a curse?
So I would say we have to be careful that it doesn't become a curse. Mm-hmm. Break it down to its sort of least common denominator. What are we doing with our time and our brain? Mm-hmm. So how are we filling those empty spaces, and what value does it create for us? Because if you spend an hour and 15 minutes watching cat videos or searching for the coolest convertible that you might want to buy someday, what have you just done with your time? And then the next least common denominator is then what does that do in relationship? My wife and I just spent a weekend at a bed and breakfast out of town, just her birthday present to me. And we, I think we had the TV on for 20 minutes. So that was wonderful to not have that thing bothering us. There were times during the day where we just left the phones in the room and went out and enjoyed sitting by a creek and being together. And it was really easy to get pulled back into that phone. And I think we have to be very careful for it not to be a creeping little curse, stealing our time and stealing time out of relationship.
From your work in TV, you were paying your dues in both theater and television. Mm-hmm. You listed that you helped build sets, operated lighting and sound for productions, as well as editing commercials, and then, as we discussed earlier, directing the morning news. Tell us a little more about all that.
So I spent the first 3 or 4 or 5 years of my career doing most everything behind the scenes that you can think of. Mm-hmm. Probably radio DJ was the exception, although I saw that as a very behind the scenes job. But assistant technical director at a performing arts theater, so running sound, setting up lights, building stages, being there for all the rehearsals, doing all the behind the scenes work. Same thing in the television industry. Started off running a studio camera, and then technical directing, and then directing, and then editing television commercials, but all behind the scenes. And that's where I belonged back then, and it's where I thought I belonged. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't have any idea what year it was, but probably 96 or 97.
Yeah.
And I graduated undergrad in 90. So 6-7 years into the career, a very insightful boss said to me, "Hey, you've always been behind the scenes. You want to try sales?" And I said, no, not at all. And she said, no, really, I think you should try this. We have an opening. It's low risk. Just try it. And she told me why I should try it. And so that year that I spent in sort of traditional outside sales for a cable television advertising company was a real turning point in my career. So everything up to then had been behind the scenes, pretty good at it, but honestly realized at some point that I had never had the confidence to be in front of the camera or working directly with the customer, and that it took someone else seeing a possibility. And that was a possibility that would have been good for me and frankly good for her. If I had been successful in sales, that would have filled a hard to fill role. And then that actually set my entire career in media on a completely different path for the next 15 or 18 years.
It's so interesting how so being on the content side of things, when I was in the entertainment business, we would always be a little bit jealous of distribution, so to speak, because distribution always had all the power over us. They would have all the leverage. But what we didn't realize was distribution changes all the time. Yep. Content at some level never does.
Somebody's got to create a good story,
right,
or a good sport,
right,
or there's nothing to distribute.
Right. Then your time at Suddenlink, and I'm always interested in that particular evolution because that's where you knew my friend Justin Kling, friend of the show, who hasn't been on with us yet, but may at some point. Tell us about all of that.
Yeah, so after I was in field sales for about a year, I was actually taken back into production. Okay. So I was taken back into, but now another turning point for my career, which was someone else saw something in me and said, we think you can manage. We think you could supervise a much larger production function. And so that's what brought me to College Station, Texas. Oh. So 1997 was offered. So we had a centralized production facility. So we're making television commercials for small towns all across Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana. And we're making those here in College Station. So the capital intense function, a lot of money goes into those back then. And so we had this centralized function with all these people that literally would drive out for a couple of days, make commercials, come back, and we would edit them all here. And I was brought here to manage that function and probably did that for about a year. And interestingly, I actually think it was my idea that we should sort of tear that function down and move all the resources out to the field. So this is at a real turning point in technology where it no longer costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up an edit suite. We're not quite at the point of doing it on laptops yet back in the 90s, but we've moved to buying much less expensive equipment. And I mean, frankly, what happened was when it was cheaper to build a production studio than it was to purchase a van, then it's cheaper to put the assets on the edge out in the field and stop buying as many vans to drive people back and forth.
Right.
So we literally move all the assets out. And that was the idea that I take to the boss, our vice president at the time, and said, I think we should do this. And we should shut this function down here because it has such enormous inefficiency in it. And we don't need to buy this equipment anymore.
Right.
And his answer was, great, perfect. What are you going to do? Because I was supervising the whole function. And I just said, let's move the function out there. So now we have another turning point. It created an opportunity for me to do a function in the organization that was brand new, emerging. And they said, okay, you seem like you could figure this thing out. So go figure out this new thing. So within a matter of a couple of years, I went from production to sales to production management to a completely new function in the cable business back then that then I did for probably 10 or 12 years after that.
What and exactly how did that function? So my guess from sitting here and thinking about how that would best function is you're coordinating with people out in the field and helping, like you're managing the places that they are, I guess, and then they're generating the content and just shipping it back to you electronically, or how does that all?
So in the new model that we went to, they actually went to work for a local sales manager out in the field. So I no longer had that staff. They were, I literally completely tore the function down. It didn't exist anymore.
Okay.
So I was a production manager and then no longer was a production manager.
Right.
So I was actually given another department to go manage and got out of the production business.
I see. So then what was that next department?
Oh, man. So this is geeky TV stuff. The next thing I did was I sold all of our unsold inventory. So we sold advertising inventory. Mm-hmm. So on CNN, there's X number of 30-second availabilities per hour that the local cable has to sell.
Right.
So there's national advertisers, but then the local advertisers can be sold. So the car dealership, the tire company, the barbecue place, they get an ad.
Right.
We didn't sell all those ads.
Right.
So I sold all of our unsold ads.
So is that like just the second layer of sales, or how does that work? You said you sold all the unsold.
There were national advertisers who would buy those up at essentially pennies on the dollar.
Right.
Or back then what we were doing was we were partnering with those advertisers and we were taking a commission off of whatever they were selling.
Oh.
So we were essentially risking with them. There was almost no risk because the inventory was going to go unsold.
Right.
So we would sell it for a percentage of whatever they were selling, or for a certain dollar out per lead. So they would be trying to sell something of greater value, and they would pay us $4 every time their phone rang. So they were paying us on performance. So that business was often called pay for performance. And so we then started partnering with them. And over the years, what we learned to do was aggregate a lot of media and create a relatively unique package. And what we found, and this was a finding with a client and I got together and we found something very unique in Suddenlink's footprint nationwide. The demographic that we could get into their homes was 1.5% of the national footprint, but it was almost exactly the same demographic. So if you looked at men, women, if you looked at race, if you looked at anything socioeconomic, any demographic you looked at, we had almost an exact mirror on a much smaller footprint.
Oh.
So we became a national testing platform for advertising agencies. And
That's
so,
fascinating.
So then we moved from making $4 every time their phone rings to starting to sell this advertising on a weekly basis so that they can test new products or they can test creative. So they may have something they're selling and they have two different versions of the ad. One version is if you call within the next 15 minutes, you get a discount. And the other version is buy one, get one free. And they want to know which one of those versions plays better. So we advertise, we post those commercials out there for a week. We provide them a bunch of data on the back end so that they can compare demographics. And then they could run analytics to determine which one of their commercials they wanted to spend much more money promoting across the U.S. And we were the test platform for them. And that ran for, well, in a version, it's still running today. There's just other people that are doing it.
It sounds like there was a bunch of exciting stuff happening here. And up to this point, a lot of exciting things happening. What was your most exciting experience from any of those early working days that stands out today?
It was a result of, the one moment that comes to mind is a result of my MBA. So as I'm earning my MBA at Mays in the executive MBA program, my perspective is changing. So instead of trying to just meet the client in the moment where they are and provide something of value and move really fast and get off the phone and try to make a commission and try to make them happy.
Transactional.
Yeah. And it wasn't bad transactional. It had value on both ends. But what the MBA taught me was don't just talk to the buyer. See if the CEO is interested in having a much larger conversation. So we literally had a moment where we invited an organization, one of our bigger clients, to come to College Station. Oh. And we got in a boardroom and they sat on one side of the table and we sat on the other side of the table and we spent half a day just digging into each other's businesses. So creating trust. So we had a long relationship, but it didn't exist So, I get my boss in the room and his boss in the room, and we really start digging into where are their pain points? What would they like to solve in the next 5 to 10 years? If they would open their books to us, we would start understanding where they were receiving revenues and where their profits were coming from, where were their greatest margins, what were the things that they were in the business of doing that they wish they could stop. And then they did the same for us. They just asked questions. And through several conversations like that, the advertising that we were selling started taking on whole new meaning. And the example was a client said to us, it's not just the ads, it's the data. If we could only find someone who could provide us the audience data on the back end. Now, this is 2008, 2009. So back end audience data at that point is very rare.
Sure.
Only probably.
Unless you're Facebook.
Yeah. I mean, it's only in the internet business. This doesn't exist. It exists conceptually in TV. So through inferences is how it existed in TV.
Okay.
Not through things like set-top box data and actual eyeballs on a screen. And we have the ability to do some of that. And so when after 4 hours of talking in a room, when a client says, if we could just get the data, and I literally look over at a guy that's in the room at the time and said, Jason, could we give him the data? I said, of course we can give them the data. We could FTP it to them. We could have it to them overnight. We could just drop it out on this site. They could download it. In what format would you like the data? And so our business takes a whole new meaning. And this is what got us into that national footprint, representative national footprint business. And so that moment came from sort of the confidence to say, let's just sit down and talk and discover potential and discover possibilities instead of be in a healthy transactional relationship. Instead of that is really get into a deeper value building relationship, understanding what do they need? Can we provide it? Holy mackerel, yes, we can.
Right. I want to go back to the data thing for a second. It seems like in 2019, life as a consumer is a fight between you and the company who is giving you stuff, and they want all of your data, and you decide how much of it you are willing to part with in order to get the thing that is behind the next. It's the equivalent of a paywall. Mm-hmm. It's a data paywall. And they say, in order to do this, you have to give us your email, and you can give them like a fake email or whatever, like an extra email that you don't use. But then they want your location when you're using the app. Mm-hmm. And then they want your location when you're not using the app, and then they want access to your Facebook profile, and then they want access to your friends list, and you just have to decide, how bad do I really want this thing? Is it worth whatever they're asking for at this point? So we have to make these really incremental decisions about how our data gets distributed, and for some people, I guess it's really grating, and they're like, I don't want anybody to have any of my data ever. But then they have to give up all this stuff. And it's sort of like, I think it's the evolutionary version of, I don't want to talk to people who are trying to sell me something because, but what you have to do is you just have to, I think the better version of that is to just learn how to deal with those conversations. And if someone is the best salespeople are not pushy. They're just asking you questions. It's sort of like the good waiter or waitress versus the bad one. The good one just says, would you like any dessert today? The bad one is like kind of pushes the dessert at you. And the good one is just helping you decide if you want to buy something or not.
Good salespeople are simply trying to figure out your need.
Yes.
And whether their product or service can meet that need.
Yes.
And I'll back up just a few minutes. When you asked me what was the moment was us uncovering a need that was so much deeper than any of us thought we could solve together. So the process of really digging into needs and capabilities and finding something that was probably 3 or 4 or 5 layers deep through a 4-hour conversation with a group of C-suite folks.
Right.
That was the moment for me that I knew. That was the moment that I knew this MBA thing was working.
Right. When you find something inside a really smart person's mind that they didn't even know was there.
Yeah.
Those are always cool moments.
And it was just conversations that were based in trust that sort of had this assumption of maybe something of value could come out of it. And I know I've been in those conversations where nothing of value came out of it in the moment, where we're just talking, we're just trying to figure things out. But then even if it's just the relationship that's improved, Because so I was de facto in phone sales for a number of years. So I was selling this unsold inventory over the phone. And your absolute best client interaction was when a client would call you and say, hey, I know you don't do so-and-so, but I know you know people in the industry. Would you give me a recommendation? Yeah. So when people are trusting you enough to recommend some related product or related service, that's when you knew you were making it. And when I came to A&M, that was the thing that I thought I was going to miss the most, was those relationships with those 20 or 30 or 40 people around the country, clients, customers, who we had built that level of trust. We could dig into each other's business. We could just help each other. And I did miss that. I missed that for a number of years when I got here, and then it was replaced by something pretty remarkable, and that was the transformation of students. Was seeing the change that students go through by earning their MBA here, discovering who they are, transforming who they are. That's what sort of replaced those relationships that I had, of relationships based on trust. That has been replaced by watching our students grow and transform and become and be able to do those kind of things.
That would be a fantastic segue. But before we get to that, one final question about the first part of your career. So of all the professional lessons that you learned throughout that early evolution, which one was the most counterintuitive? What surprised you the most from 1990 until you started serving as the program director?
So I mentioned to you earlier that I don't think I have a lot of original thought. I think I collect a lot of thought.
Sure.
I had a boss named Brent Skinner who had a lot of sayings. And one of the sayings that he had that I just didn't understand for a long time, and then when I finally did understand it, it became that counterintuitive lesson. And then it was that, his simple saying, sometimes you got to slow down to speed up. Sometimes you got to slow down to speed up. And I saw him as constantly moving, constantly active, pulling and pushing people forward all the time. So I didn't understand, what did he mean slow down? And what does he mean slow down? Because I never saw him be slow
down.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when he would repeat this, one of several mantras that he had, when he repeated it over and over, I finally was able to see when he slowed down and how he would take a group of people and slow us down so that we could then make decisions, make a plan, create clarity. That was something that he was really good at, about creating clarity about where we were going and why, so that then all of our actions would sort of funnel down so that we could then speed up to get there. So slow down to speed up took me a long time to understand.
You mentioned that you came to College Station in 97?
I believe that's correct.
What was there anything in particular that inspired you to stay? Obviously you have a lot of things keeping you here now, but what's that? That story?
I loved what I did, and I loved the people that I worked with. It was a joy. There were a group of us that sort of came up there. A few of those are still there, but many of my best friends today were folks that started there in an individual contributor role, and they were either my boss or I was their boss, or we were coworkers for some period of time.
Right.
Because I think I spent a total of 17 years there. And so those relationships within that organization, that kept me very cautious about looking to go other places and do other things.
Right.
Even when the offers would come up, my standard was pretty high because of the joy that I had at work almost on a daily basis. And then in 1999, I met this girl by the water cooler, and she has kept me here. So those two things have probably kept me here. One, the joy of the people I work with, and then two, the girl I met by the water cooler, who is now my wife.
I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to ask a question about your wife. How many kids were in her family?
She is one of 12. There are 12 of them. They're in the Bryan College Station area. They're pretty well known, the Conderla family. She's one of 12. My very old, tired joke is 9 or 10 of them are pretty decent. Many of them are still here in town. A few have spread. One's in Oklahoma. The bishop is in Oklahoma, and a sister is in Colorado. Uh-huh. But pretty much everybody else is everybody is within a day's driving distance.
Right. The only Condor lot I know is Chuck. Hi, Chuck.
Number 12.
Right?
Yep.
You said he has 12th child syndrome?
He has 12th child syndrome, yeah. You have to look that one up. They're an absolutely amazing family of people who work their tails off and are amazingly giving. Just an amazingly giving family. Yeah. So growing up in a family of 4, holidays today are not the same as when I was a kid. That's an understatement. There are numerous stories about my integration into that family and struggling with the fact that Thanksgiving is a 5-day event.
Oh.
Yeah. As a kid growing up, to me, Thanksgiving was, like lunch and supper, and Thanksgiving was over. Not in the Condorla family.
I appreciate that you say supper. I like that.
Well, when I was growing up, it was dinner and supper. There was no such thing as lunch. There was dinner and supper. So if my dad invited you for dinner, you better show up at noon,
right?
Or you weren't going to get to eat.
During the last few years at Suddenlink, you enrolled in the MBA program here at Mays, completing it in 2010. Mm-hmm. What sparked the new chapter? Why the change?
Yeah, MBA. When I moved here in 1997, I wanted an MBA. I always wanted to be an Aggie.
Oh.
Always wanted to be an Aggie. Only looked at a couple of schools to go undergraduate. Church really pulled me to where I went, to Abilene Christian. I always knew that I would end up. So actually, I always knew that I would end up living in College Station. I always knew I would go to graduate school here. As I got farther and further into my career, it got narrowed down to it was an MBA. So in about 1998, I physically came to this building asking about an MBA. And in 1998, the executive MBA had not started yet.
Okay.
Whoever I spoke with in 1998 must not have known that it was going to start, because basically you can enter into the full-time program or you can keep your day job at Suddenlink. You can't do both. Right. And so I was not interested. I loved what I did, couldn't afford to stop, wasn't interested in stopping and making a big career pivot.
Right.
I wanted to grow. And so I parked the MBA idea. And I think 10 years later, I saw an ad. And, so they now have a way that you can do this executive MBA thing. So
sure.
January of 2008, my wife literally kicked me in the rear and said, "You've been talking about it for 10 years. Why don't you apply?" Yep. Yeah. I remember exactly where we were walking on the sidewalk in our neighborhood when I literally moved behind me and kicked me in the rear and said, just apply. And I applied and came up here and interviewed. I actually interviewed in this very room. In this room, I interviewed for, I'm just realizing that now. And then on May 29th, 2008, I got the letter that said you're in. And then graduated in May of 2010.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny because you say you remember the exact spot on the sidewalk where you were when your wife kicked you in the behind and said, just apply. It seems like do you find that your memories of significant things that have happened in your life are clearer if they are more recent? I mean, it seems like that would be a sensible thing.
So I don't know the answer to that, but so I'm going to answer a slightly different question. What I know is the experience that I had of not having the confidence that I would get in, not having the confidence that I could do it. I think that's an experience that a lot of our prospective students have is this self-doubt of, well, it's Mays Business School. It's an MBA. I really want to do it, but I won't even bother because I probably can't get in.
Oh.
And so I literally sat on that fence for 10 years. I didn't think I could get in. Now, I was also ignorant about the executive MBA program. But then once I found out about the executive MBA program, the reason I wasn't applying was the assumption that my application would be denied. And so the question I still want to ask our applicants is, what's the probability that you're going to get in if you don't apply? 0. What's the probability that you're going to get in if you do apply? Well, mathematically, the answer is 0 or greater than 0. And so what you're betting on is the or greater than 0. But if you don't apply, that's not an option.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if the memory is more clear for me because it's more recent, but the memory is relevant because I think a lot of our prospective students probably have something like that going on.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah, so you got to take it. Yeah, and around here, that just means start an application, turn it in, find out.
Yes. Shortly after the MBA program, you joined Mays and have served as the director of the professional MBA program for a little over 7 years. We thank you for that, obviously. What is most critical for a PMBA student to gain from the program?
So when you look at the surface of an MBA, there is a lot of knowledge and skill, and you must gain those things. When you hang that thing on your wall,
yes,
there are some assumptions that people are going to make about you, and you need to be able to meet those assumptions. You need to be able to have certain kinds of conversations about certain topics. You need to be able to read a balance sheet. You need to understand how finance decisions are made and be part of making them. You need to know some basics, more than basics about statistics. You need to know a lot of things about human behavior. So on the surface, you've got to at least get those basic ingredients. I think you cannot walk away from Maze, and I think this is what attracts a lot of people here, without something that goes layers deeper, which is you've got to understand yourself. So our mantra, discover, transform, impact. The discovery is not only discovery of skills and knowledge and abilities and things that people expect of you, but the discovery is also about yourself and how you interact with the world and how you're perceived by the world and maybe how you want to change that and how you want to grow your influence. And then when we talk about transforming, we're talking about transforming yourself through that discovery of self so that then you can go have an impact. And the reality is, you can have an impact by being really good at finance, but you can probably have a lot more impact by how you lead people, how you talk to people, how people see you. And so that impact, that's what I think people can't, if they miss that while they're here, they've really missed something, because the reality is all the skills, you could get those. We used to say you could get those out of the library. Now you can get them online. You can get those skills through the experience of the MBA. You're going to get something deeper, and it's the discovery of self.
Right. And the willingness, I think here, one of the most important things that we teach ourselves and help teach others and train ourselves to do is to understand when it's time to subvert the self.
Yeah.
And when it's time to say, this is not about me. This is about, for example, advancing the world's prosperity.
So the beautiful transition that I like to see over 2 years is when students come in, what they're typically talking about is self, is adding knowledge, adding skills, adding abilities. Maybe they're talking about growing their own confidence. But when they leave, several of our MBA programs have a final presentation, and the question is some version of, who are you now? You're different, you're changed. So what's the major thing you've learned, or who are you? Reintroduce yourself. And in a number of those final presentations, what I hear is some version of, what I've discovered is it ain't about me. It is about my influence on others. And if I build them up,
right,
I will also be successful. But remember, it ain't actually about me and my success. It's about them and their success.
Right.
And I think that's beautiful. I think if you walk out of here knowing yourself and having, what a lot of people get through an MBA is an enormous amount of confidence as well. So I can do this thing, whatever this thing is. And so, yay. But then can they then impart that on others and at the same time become lifelong learners? So discover self to empower others and be a lifelong learner so that you continue to keep up with the skills and keep up with how do you motivate and influence people.
Right. And motivate and influence them to do this good thing and to hold sacred these values that really bind together not just everyone at Texas A&M, because Texas A&M is great, but it's really about, and Maze, I think as well, is really about an idea. And everyone who holds dear that idea, the idea of sacrifice and service and pressing forward a common good and helping those who didn't have the same privileges that we had. If you're about that, you are us and we are you, regardless of whether you went to the same business school or not. And there's something really cool about that.
A lot of things have happened in this office. A guy that used to sit in this office for years and years, who you've interviewed for this show, Dr. Mike Kinney, that guy could boil things down to their simplest elements. And the way he boiled down what you just said, what makes this place different, he boiled it down to care and collaboration. And that was it. And that was his simple, clear, we care about each other. We care about what we care about. We care about it so deeply that we will sacrifice, and we're going to do it together, whatever it is. He talked about that as what makes this place unique. But I think also as the people leave here, then that's what they take to their place to make it unique. They have a greater ability, a greater willingness to show their care, right, and then to collaborate with others to share a value out there. Now, that may be different than our value. It's probably really closely related, but go take that thing that we've planted here and go make it also happen out there so that whatever you're doing out there has more meaning than just some transactional thing.
Right. You also teach leadership and communication at Mays. You've been praised for your leadership communication skills and, quote, challenging the status quo. That's a quote from Kyle Salem in 2010, I believe. With these qualities in mind, what do you think makes you different as a lecturer and presenter? You talked a little bit earlier about pulling stuff from different compartments and so forth. Do you do that in speaking as well, or is there something else that sets you apart?
Well, when I'm planning, what I want the student to get, and then I start thinking about how, often multiple streams come together. And so I don't think this is completely unique. I look at John Krychek and think, so his definition of presenting equals presence. So he will move you from not only being a good public speaker to things like 360 so that you can understand about how people see you. I think I do that. And I learned a lot of that from him. He pulls things that are of interest to him in the world, and then I do the same. They're just different things of interest. So I can't help but when we are learning about communication to also bring some stuff called appreciative inquiry into communication, which wasn't originally set up to be a communication tool. It was set up to be a change management tool, but I've kind of figured out some ways to shove those things together. So do I think it makes me unique to combine ideas and to combine activities? No, I don't think it makes me unique. But I think it actually comes from the fact, so I don't have a PhD in a thing. I don't have that area of expertise that's really specific and narrow. And I don't mean narrow in a bad way. I mean narrow in a powerful way. I don't have that. And so what I do have is 20 plus years of experience working, some tools and some things I learned there. I have an MBA there were some absolutely fantastic professors who gave me some stuff there. And then what the MBA did for me was to make me into a lifelong learner. So I've learned some new stuff, and then I bring that together. I don't think that is unique. I think what I bring might be unique. The bringing it together is not unique. What I bring might be a unique combination.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And anytime you hear someone like draw two things together, so I work fairly closely with my dad and Steve Wiggins. He's a professor of economics here. And he has that skill you're talking about where he can find something here and then reach his arm out over, 6 miles, grab something from, that's over in Franklin. I don't know exactly how far Franklin is, but anyway, grabs something over there and then brings those two things together. And you just say, I don't know how you tied all of that together, but it's so fun to watch.
And I don't even know I don't know how unique that is, but I'll tell you, I find it just fun as heck. So that's probably, it's the energy that I get from doing it that I want to give off to others. And it's not that they need to take those exact same ideas and combine them. Sometimes they don't even know I'm using the other idea. I'll just use it as a tool. But if people find fun, if people find energy pulling ideas together, and if I can be an example of that, great. If they get their energy from a very deep, narrow, beautiful, deep study of a certain thing and then teaching that has enormous value as well, especially in a place like an MBA program where we expect you to get really deep in a number of subjects.
Right. I'm going to shift gears slightly. You've also been regarded as an expert of appreciative inquiry. What is appreciative inquiry?
Appreciative inquiry started off as a change management methodology. Okay. So by definition, it is the study of what gives life to human systems. Oh. The study of what gives life to human systems when they are at their best. The study of what gives life to human systems when they are at their best. So it actually started off as a research methodology by a PhD student at Case Western Reserve. Mm-hmm. He then documented a set of principles. So David Cooper Ryder, he documented a set of principles that appreciative inquiry sits on top of. And it's things like the simultaneity principle and the poetic principle and the, there's 8 of them. So he builds a set of principles around appreciating. So when I was learning on my MBA, one of the things I learned was if you don't know what a phrase means, just break down the individual words. So appreciative inquiry, we're going to appreciate. We're going to look at something and we're going to study it. We're going to study it and we're going to study the best of. And then the other definition of appreciate, in the hopes that, so that what we're studying will grow. Okay. So we're going to allow it to appreciate. So we're going to study an asset or a set of relationships, some strengths within an organization. We're going to study the best of so that the best of will grow. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to do that through inquiry. And inquiry, literally asking questions, but asking questions in dialogue, often started in one-on-one dialogue. And it's the who that's in the inquiry that matters. So it's not just the CEO and the CFO and the strategic planner. Right. It's everybody in the organization. So that's another one of the principles. It's whole system change. Okay. So it's an enormously inclusive process. It's not enormously inclusive. It is inclusive. Right. It is probably the most inclusive strategic planning or planning process because every stakeholder or representatives from every stakeholder group is represented in the inquiry that then leads to the appreciation. So we're going to appreciate. We're going to do that through dialogue and asking questions, the right questions. We're going to do that with the whole system. So appreciative inquiry for strategic planning is not 7 people sitting in a room, monthly meetings that produce a big white binder that goes on a shelf. It is big group meetings. It is long periods of one-on-one conversations that are structured so that the strategic plan comes from the organization. So whole system, appreciate, inquire, and then it has a sense of improv. So there's a set of processes, but those processes must be adapted for the organization at that time. So that's what appreciative inquiry is in concept. Its purpose, its original purpose was change management. When it started getting applied in the world outside of academia, it was about change management. It was helping organizations, a process that they could go through to envision their powerfully positive future. So go through a set of processes to make plans for your future. That's sort of its biggest, most ambitious use. Next layer down, it's a method for asking questions. It's a method to help people see and appreciate what is. So it's an antithesis to problem solving. So problem solving, which is enormously valuable, problem solving came out of the mechanical revolution. So problem solving started on an assembly line. Mm-hmm. So a system is broken. Let's figure out what the problem is. What are the criteria for success? What are the options? And let's deploy one. Typical problem solving. Yeah. Appreciative inquiry is the antithesis because it's applied to human systems. So if you apply problem solving to a human system, somewhere in the process of solving the problem in a human system, de facto, a human is the problem. And what happens is that will suck all the energy out of the problem solving. So if we are an airline and we're trying to determine what the heck is going wrong with baggage and baggage isn't getting to the final destination, so if the problem is baggage isn't arriving, yes, somewhere in that process, humans are going to probably end up being blamed. Either they're doing it wrong or they wrote something wrong and they wrote the code wrong. Things aren't working. And as soon as that starts happening, the human system starts cratering. We start losing energy because if I'm now to blame, I'm probably going to start throwing up roadblocks. I'm going to blame others. I'm going to get really defensive in an organization. Right. So traditional problem solving applied to a human system has some cost. Appreciative inquiry eliminates that cost. Appreciative inquiry from the very beginning starts changing the language. So it's not the problem of baggage not arriving on time. We have to change the question.
So it is, for example, then it is the opportunity to help more baggage arrive on time?
What creates a delightful arrival experience?
Okay. And then
that's what we study.
Right.
So we study what creates a delightful arrival experience.
Right.
And so now in that study, probably if whoever you assume were the problem people in the previous definition, those folks are much more engaged.
Right.
So if we're just creating delightful arrival experience, there's nobody to blame. So we're no longer problem solving. We have done, and it's commonly called the flip, just take the problem and turn it on its head and ask, what do we want more of?
Right.
So that's just one little example of the methodology of appreciation is that you take what is the problem and turn it into what's called the affirmative topic choice. So there's an example. Instead of why the heck is baggage handling going wrong? Why can't we get bags to final destination? Turn it to what creates a delightful arrival experience. And there is a lifetime, I would assume. I don't know. I'm 4 or 5 years into it. And every time I have an opportunity to use appreciative inquiry, I'd learn more and more and more. So I'm going to finish answering your question. What is it? A change management method. Next layer down, it's a method for asking questions. And then at some point, if you live it and use it and do it often enough, it can become, I don't want to overstate it, but like a philosophy for living. So it can be, it involves the way I coach people now. I would rather not problem solve with folks that I'm coaching. I would rather find what is working and focus on that and help them accentuate that.
Right.
And then the question always becomes, yeah, but what about the problem? Well, the reality is if we focus on the asset or the thing that is good, we will de facto end up solving the problem, if you want to use that language, or we will make that problem completely insignificant. So Peter Drucker said the job of leadership is to align a system's strengths to make its weaknesses irrelevant. That's not a perfect quote, but that's essentially what appreciative inquiry does is it aligns the strengths to make the system's weaknesses irrelevant.
So if you were to boil it down to two nuggets, what I got from that was emphasis on positivity and a collaborative process that involves everyone.
Yes. And so those are the when I went and studied with Cooper Ryder, appreciate, inquire. So that's the inclusive side.
Right.
But then he would say there was a third really fundamental required element that he didn't get in the name, and that's whole. So there's a wholeness. The whole system is involved. So when we did it here at Mays, we didn't just include the executive committee in the dean's office. The dean included the executive committee and faculty and department heads and staff and all levels of staff and donors and representatives of student groups. So look at all your stakeholders and involve them. And that's the third important element is the whole system needs to be involved. So that's the big use of appreciative inquiry. When I first got into it, I don't work in change management. That's not fundamentally what I do. I don't work in strategic planning. I work in planning events or trying to make our curriculum better. And so I started off with what I'll call the small ball use. So the day-to-day use or use the methodology in a meeting instead of us just going into a meeting and winging a certain conversation. So I started off at I'm a mid-level manager who has some influence, and I would like my influence to be better, more highly regarded, more effective, and fundamentally more positive, because me, just like most other people I know, can get really sucked into the griping. And I didn't want to do that here. I did not want to get sucked into the griping. And of course, we all still do. But I was actually looking for a method to prevent that in myself. And so a guy that used to work here mentioned appreciative inquiry to me twice, did some reading, went to some training, and now I'm sort of using it to help organizations strategically plan, which is bizarre to me.
Love that. Let's move to some rapid fire.
Cool.
What do you consider your most valuable failure?
That first TV job I had, I quit. 3 years into it, I was arrogant. I was short-sighted, and I quit that job when I was 24 or 25. I was impatient, and my failure was that I quit because I got passed over for a promotion. And right after I quit, I found out the organization had a plan for me, and I didn't know it. And I thought I was the only one who could do it. I thought I was irreplaceable. And so it's the lessons from that failure of quitting without talking to someone, of quitting in a flurry of arrogance, quitting without knowing what the company's plan was, assuming the grass was greener without asking. That's taught me patience, taught me to slow down. It's taught me to see the value in others. It's also taught me the perspective of what maybe other 24 and 25-year-olds are thinking.
What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
So I don't know if there's a single big misconception, but there's sort of a series of dichotomies. I think I present as fairly outgoing and extroverted and willing to say things and ask questions at meetings. And the reality is somewhere I'm actually more introverted than extroverted. I need time by myself to recharge. So when I'm doing the things that people see me do, I'm giving off energy. And I used to define a great weekend as truck pulls into the driveway at 5:30 on Friday and pulls out at 7:30 on Monday. And that was when I was single and nobody came to the house. So literally an entire weekend by myself. I get that now in little spurts here and there. So that's one misconception. The other misconception is doing what we do for a living, we present as fairly professional. I'm still a country bumpkin. Get me home on the weekend and none of my T-shirts have sleeves. My wife won't let me to go to the store looking like that. She tries to throw away my T-shirts that are older than our marriage. I will often dig them out of the rag bin. So there's a simplicity to what gives me pleasure. And you put those together and yep, I like to be by myself. I like to be in my yard. I like to be tinkering in the garage. And I'll do it as a East Texas country bumpkin. So that kind of stuff.
If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
I think if I could spend time with anyone, so I will answer your question. If I could spend time with anyone, I would love to have, if I could go back in time, I would like to spend a day with either my dad and or my father-in-law. And I'd like to see them in their youth. So I don't know that I would want them to mentor me. I would just like to know what they were like when they were, 17 or 19, or when my dad was in the army in Germany in his 20s before he got married to my mom. I'd like to spend a day just sort of observing my dad and my father-in-law, who have both passed away. But if I could have a mentor, I used to work for a man named Bobby Wood, who has also passed away. Bobby Wood ran a church camp in the mountains that I used to work at. And that man was one of the most driven, hard, high expectations, fast moving, drove me into the ground physically at this camp that we worked at, but had unlimited amount of love and care for the people that he was pushing like that. And I see so many parallels to that man and that time in my youth to what we now do for a living, pushing on people and loving them at the same time. And I would actually like to talk to him about why he did that, how he did it, sort of what he saw as the purpose. I could make some pretty good assumptions about it. And then I would like to continue to apply that to what we do here and what I'm going to continue to do in the future.
It's funny how the people who drive us the hardest, well, maybe it's not a coincidence at all, but how those people often have a lasting impact on us.
I'd love to say somebody like Leonardo da Vinci. That sounds really cool. But my list of mentors would be the people who have had influence on me, and they have, to a person, been extremely hard driving people in my life. Don Benoit, Lynn Cooper, Bobby Wood, Brent Skinner. And so not Leonardo da Vinci, real people that I knew that pushed me, that either forced me or created opportunity for me to grow.
Yeah. What is your fondest memory of TAMU?
So, I didn't do my undergraduate here, so I don't have some of those, what I would think would be sort of traditional experiences. My fondest memory was a Sunday afternoon standing in my front yard by myself about to quit the executive MBA program because I was dying trying to either do some homework or an exam. I was just cracking. I couldn't keep up. I was physically and mentally exhausted. I didn't understand what I was doing, and I was just about to throw in the towel. And I called one of my teammates, Shaddy. I called Shaddy, one of my teammates, and I just told him where I was. And he, sort of quote unquote, talked me off the ledge. He's like, we've all been here before. You'll get through this. Can I give you a recommendation? Put the books down for an hour, go do something else, get out of your own head. And that support that he showed me and his view of me outside the me at the moment that was so helpful to me, that is my single fondest memory and he doesn't even know about this. I should probably tell him. But him sort of saving me. Now, would I have actually quit? Probably not. But the care that he showed me in that moment, and I think that moment probably happens over and over and over in many different ways around here. So that represents what this place is to me. And it was just a phone call to Shaddy. That was it.
Great. We end each session with Good Bull, opportunity to recognize someone else for something good or great they have done. Anyone you would like to send some Good Bull?
So I have done this job now for a little over 7 years. And about 2 years ago, I realized I was one of the old ones around here, which shocked me. Julie Orzabal is the person who's been around here since the Mayflower, the director of our executive MBA. But I looked around one day and realized that most people were newer than me. Right. And so I still felt very new to this organization. And yet, relative to a lot of my peers, I'd been here a while. And so the people I want to give Good Bull to are Jeff Jones and Deb Mann. Jeff Jones and Deb Mann, they work with me, one in Houston, one here, and they've been with me essentially since the beginning of my time here. Mm-hmm. And when I think about the good things we've done, I'm not sure it would have been possible. Or if it would have been possible, it wouldn't have come out in the same way if it hadn't been for the two of them working with me on the things that we've done. So the people I would like to give Good Bull to, Jeff Jones, facilities manager at City Center in Houston, and Deborah Mann, assistant director of the professional MBA program.
Good Bull indeed. Mike, thanks for your time.
It's cool to be here.
What a great discussion. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.